Do you have a home that was ordered from a catalog and built from a kit? Let's find out. In this next hour, learn about a charming yet fascinating period in our American history, the phenomena of kit homes and how they changed rural American housing from 1908 to 1940. The great American dream almost since the beginning of our country has been the owning of a piece of land and building a dream home. Imagine that home arriving through the mail in 30,000 parts. The Lorain was one of the styles the Sears Roebuck catalog offered in their Book of Modern Homes. Today, there are only 3 left in their original condition, and this is one of them. Right now, you'll see the Lorain being restored while learning about the history and hearing stories of this uniquely American time. So watch and see how the historical value was maintained during restoration. Also, by learning how to identify kit homes, you can help save these living monuments that left such an indelible mark. Many have survived to this day, and it's time to protect them. First up is author Rosemary Thornton, who will walk us through the process of ordering your house, show ways to identify these houses, and share her collection of original catalogs. You are in for some real American pride.
I've been a freelance writer for several years, and I was asked to write about the Sears homes in Carlinville, Illinois. Carlinville has 156 Sears homes in a 12-block area. And I went out there to research and write this one article, and I fell in love with the houses. They were so cute, they were well made, they were still standing after so many years. They were built in 1919. From that point, I decided I wanted to learn more about the topic, and I went looking for a book on Sears homes. And I found that there was no book on Sears homes, so I decided perhaps it was time to write a book. Well, between 1908 to 1940, Sears offered kit homes in their general merchandise catalogs, and the houses ranged in price from $500 to $5,000. And it was a complete kit. It came with 30,000 pieces of house, together with a 75-page instruction book. Sears started selling these kit homes in 1908, but they didn't really take off until World War I. After World War I and the soldiers came back, there was a tremendous housing shortage. In fact, housing analysts estimated there were 1 to 2 million housing units needed immediately. And that's when the sale of kit homes really skyrocketed. So it's pretty unusual to find a Sears kit home pre-World War I. One of Sears' ads, in fact it was on the back of their 1918 Sears Modern Homes catalog, said, "Hang your saw on a nail all day." And the average builder back then, the average homeowner, do-it-yourself builder, would have been using a handsaw. He would not have had the power tools that we have today. So the fact that the lumber came pre-cut was a really impressive part of the deal and saved a lot in labor and time. Sears had their own staff of architects that would sit around and sketch out designs and draw plans for their kit homes. And they looked at what was popular back in the day. They would look at the popular housing designs of that era, and they'd tell the architects, build us a few of these. So yes, it was all male architects. They did have a woman on staff who was an interior designer, and it was her job to review the architect's plans and make sure the homes would be pleasing to a woman. She drew the little itty-bitty dotted lines in the book that showed ideal placement for Davenport, stereos, phonographs. That's the reason Sears got into selling kit homes. It was a way to sell more of the stuff in his 100,000 item, 1,200 page, 4-pound catalog. And it was very successful.
Next, a design consultant with an extensive knowledge of this period in history talked about a design style that will bring 1935 into today.
Back in the 20s, the 30s, a lot of times you walked right into a room, especially a Sears Craftsman style room. These homes were meant for very cozy living, practical living, and that's why the rooms are small. If we had furniture in here, we would feel so comfortable because we don't have to shout to each other. Right away, a conversation will be started. So this color has to, so these rooms really should be almost treated the same. So you, okay, so that it doesn't look like an afterthought. You have to make sure when you do it, it doesn't look like you ran out of paint. You know, that every wall was done, oh, we forgot, you know, so make sure that those colors definitely, that color somehow gets put into here. Paper like this or something, a faux finish, would be wonderful inside of, just inside. A lot of times they, you'll see Frank Lloyd Wright's influence on these homes. You know, the geometrics, the very, you know, they thought it was modern, but it was modern because of the amenities. What we call modern today is two different moderns, you know, contemporary modern. Today we would call this very traditional. And tradition just doesn't go out of style.
After you picked out the house you liked out of the Sears Modern Homes catalog, you would send in a $1 good faith deposit to Sears Roebuck, and by return mail they would ship you an entire set of blueprints and the list of building materials that were to come with your Sears home. You took a look at the blueprints, and if you liked the blueprints and you liked the inventory that was promised, you would send in the balance of your money. Sears would credit that $1 good faith deposit toward your final purchase price, and Sears would ship you, typically by rail, an entire kit house. The kit would fill about one boxcar. Sometimes the bigger homes required 2 boxcars. It was packed in an amazing manner. I've seen a photo of one of these boxcars, and I don't think there was room left over for a single nail. The kit included about 750 pounds of nails, 27 gallons of paint and varnish, 10 pounds of wood putty, 460 pounds of window weights, 72 coat hooks, and a doorbell, in addition to a lot of lumber and a lot of other parts. But it was a complete kit, had everything you needed to build a home. Then you would get a call from the station agent that your boxcar filled with Sears house parts had arrived. You would go down to the train station and they would put your boxcar on a siding. Typically you had 24, maybe 48 hours to unload the boxcar before incurring a penalty. And because the mode of transportation back then was a horse and wagon, or maybe a Model T, or a simple truck, automotive truck, often people made many trips back and forth from the boxcar to their building site. And that's why today most Sears homes will be found within 1 to 2 miles of old train tracks, because you typically would make 10, 20, even 30 trips back and forth from the boxcar to your site. The boxcar would arrive with a seal on it. Once you broke that seal, it was your responsibility to do an inventory of the pieces and parts. If you did find a broken part or a defective part in your 30,000 pieces of house, you simply contacted Sears and they would send you a new part. You didn't have to return the part or supply any evidence that it truly was damaged. They were very good about that. And what's even more amazing, of the many people I've interviewed who actually built a Sears kit home, very few ever found a missing part. Can you imagine inventorying 30,000 pieces of house and not missing anything? Or shipping it 1,000 miles or more and not having anything break?
You could even see on this curve, right here on the curve, how the tile, they just every detail, how they made a curve and they knew to order that piece. She cannot get rid of this bathroom. This is a beautiful color.
Yeah.
You'll never find a straight ceiling on the top floor unless it's an addition.
The purpose is to restore this house to its original condition in order to keep its historical value, not change the structure.
Probably one of the easier ways to find out if you have a Sears home is to go in the basement or the crawl space and look at the floor joist. And there's going to be a stamp, typically A, B, C, or D, and then a 3-digit number such as C377. And that stamp, together with that 75-page instruction book, told you how all those pieces and parts went together. And these many years later, that's a wonderful way for authenticating that you do indeed have a Sears kit home. But the Sears kit home will have a letter and a 3-digit number. Sears offered 370 different designs of their kit homes. Some people have this notion that a Sears kit home just has a look, but they were patterned to look like the popular houses of the day. So you can't really just look at a house and say, ah, it's a Sears home because it's boxy and simple, because they look like all the popular houses of that era. So it is kind of difficult to identify a Sears home. Probably the best is the stamp in the basement, looking for the marked lumber in the basement. But not all Sears homes have marked lumber. About 1 out of 3 Sears homes won't have any marks on the lumber. And you'll find that stamp in 2 places. One place is the butt end of the lumber, which you're not going to see in a completed house. And the other place is 2 to 6 inches from the end of the lumber. It's going to be on the tall face. In other words, on a 2x6, it'll be on the 6-inch side. The molding outlines in the room with the blocked corners, that's really not typical of a Sears home. I've not seen that in other Sears homes. It was just a little detail that would be very time-consuming to create. And kit homes were simple. Most kit homes had an essentially simple design because these were, about 50% of the time, the home buyer himself would build this house on his nights and weekends. So the detailing in this room is not really typical of what I've seen in other Sears homes. The archways could have been a matter of independent taste. If somebody retained a plasterer and asked him to design a specific archway, that wouldn't be difficult to do. The plaster was something that was not included with the kit, but that you would contract for privately or obtain it at your local hardware store or whatever, mainly because of the weight and regional differences also in technique and temperature and such. So the archway itself, you can't really say, ah, it's a Sears archway. Some of the woodwork, as we talked about, you can, specifically that block. So Sears would put a block there so you wouldn't have the compound angles where the different joints come together. If you just stick a wooden block there, you don't have to do a fancy miter cut. If you really look at it for a minute, it's completely out of place. The block is higher than the molding, but it was a way to solve the problem of a homeowner putting together their own kit home when they had no carpenter experience. Isn't that cool? Oh, this is nice. This is nice.
Isn't that nice?
This is nice. This is, woo! That's nice. They did things to make it easier and to keep it easy.
Rosemary stresses that a Sears kit home was kept simple to build. Fancy details and embellishments were not part of the kit.
No Joe six-pack would have had the skill to cut all of these little pieces into place.
The reason you don't feel claustrophobic in these tiny little rooms is because the ceilings are high. They're not 8-foot ceilings. They're 9 foot. They're 9-foot ceilings. I mean, you could fit a lot of people in here and wouldn't be cramped. Had this been an 8-foot ceiling, you'd be, I got to get out of here. You know, it would have been like, yeah, it would have been too much.
Yeah.
Replacing the cabinets would reduce the historical value, so only the countertop was replaced. Quality materials at affordable prices allowed residents to build their first homes. They put much thought, time, and energy into creating their own home, while adding to the architectural character of a community. They are usually more charming than any other house on the block.
Sears sold fewer than 75,000 of these kit homes in all 48 states. In Washington, D.C., about 1 out of 3 Sears homes have already been destroyed, partly because the price of real estate is so high. And they do what's called a tear down, where they buy a cheap house and tear it down for the land value. So in Washington, D.C., about 1 out of 3 Sears homes are already gone. In other metropolitan areas, that number could be that high. So it is time to start identifying them for the purpose of protecting them. The windows with either the ropes or the chains were an upgrade actually, were very popular in that era.
The windows were the only major change made to Lorain.
If she wants to have a little herb garden or whatever, I mean, it will add a little dimension, you know, and it will take her out. And what do we
Garden
have?
windows were added to the galley kitchen and gave it a feeling of more space.
Okay, so she's got some room, but don't ruin the pear for the window. You know what I'm saying? Because that's still, it would be pretty. It's a pretty little tree.
Our window expert guided us, and here's what we found.
Actually, 34% of the heat loss in a home is through the windows. In between the two panes of glass is argon gas, and if for whatever reason that were to escape, it's completely harmless. It's actually in the air we breathe every day. The thing about Energy Star Approved is it's in a lot of different products that we buy. For example, replacing Energy Star windows over the old windows can potentially save the homeowner anywhere from $125 to $340 annually, depending on the climate. Well, the energy efficiency qualities of these windows allow the heat and the cold that is outside to be stopped from getting inside. Also, the heating and cooling that you pay to put in your home doesn't escape. The great thing about vinyl is that it's virtually maintenance-free. As opposed to wood or aluminum windows, you have to periodically paint or refinish those. Once they're installed, you pretty much just look through them.
Today, you know, if you have molding on your window, you're lucky.
But you do get UV coating on the windows today.
It's hard to know who the primary customer was, who influenced the decision, who made the decision. I would imagine that most women had quite a bit of input in making these decisions. At a lecture I gave in Champaign, Illinois, a woman came, she was in her 90s, a woman came to one of my lectures in a wheelchair, and clutched in her arm she had the original blueprints from the house she and her husband had built in 1929. And she was holding those blueprints like one would cradle a precious child. And very carefully she unfolded them and showed me with great pride this house. But in her family she had made the decision, showed it to her husband, and said, "This is the house I want to build." I think that was probably fairly reflective of the era, that the home buying decision was in large part left to the wife, but that the husband perhaps had the ultimate say. And one of my favorite parts of that story is she also brought the original catalog where she and her husband had selected the house out of this decades-old catalog. And where the price was supposed to be, there was a hole. And she said, "We didn't want anyone to know what we paid for our home, so we tore the price out of the catalog so nobody would see it." People would hang on to that stuff and they would stow it in the knee walls. I met a woman in Alton, Illinois. She found the blueprints way in the eaves of her house, of her Sears home. So, and that was a surprise. They'd been up there. That was actually a 1910, 1912 Sears homes, one of those rare ones I mentioned. She found a complete set of blueprints rolled up in the attic in the corner. And it's just nobody had been, you know, way back in those eaves for decades and decades and decades. Right. So that's why I think you have a shot at finding something wonderful. Yeah, I feel nothing, hear nothing, suggesting there was ever a door here. But this is an ideal spot for a door because you won't see it coming in, right. And you'll be able to access back there.
The porch that was here wasn't really done right, if I could say it that way. There was, you know, awnings with shingles on them, which is how it even stayed up that long with snow on it is, you know, I can't understand that. Everything is now supported better. Everything that was here was rotted. All posts were rotted. We had to change all our posts. So now it's not only functional but structurally sound. Before it wasn't. So sometimes it may, on the surface, look like it's still okay, but in the longer run, there's really some serious damage that to the point where it could even fall down. The porch that was here really made the house look old. And now you look at it, you see the porch, and then you see the house, because it opens it up. It's just a much cleaner look.
But it was also the design of higher windows, so you could get a piece of furniture here.
Yeah.
You know, like you're going to put the fireplace here, which is going to bring you out probably here, and then you need here in space, and then here comes your chandelier.
The last part of my book, I have a chapter, What Did George Bailey and Sears Roebuck Have in Common? And, you know, George Bailey's a reference to the story It's a Wonderful Life. Because in that movie, which happens to be one of my favorite movies, what the movie's really about is the stability of home. Because in the movie, George says, well, how was my life important? And what he learns was that he enabled people through Bailey Brothers Building and Loan to get into a home of their own, to get out of these decrepit little shacks into a home of their own. And in the alternate Bedford Falls, which is Pottersville, he meets the cab driver, Ernie, and he asks Ernie, well, what about your wife back at home? And Ernie says, my wife ran off 3 years ago and took the kid. And the implication is because Ernie, in his alternate world, never had a home of his own. He lost his family. And that was a very prevalent thought in that era, from World War I to World War II, that homeowners made better citizens. There was more stability in the family, more stability in the workplace, and by extension, more stability in the community. And I can only imagine what good Sears brought to countless communities where they enabled who knows how many people, at least 75,000 people, to become homeowners who might not otherwise have had the opportunity. Building a kit home saved you about 1/3 the cost of traditional construction. In other words, once you build a kit home, you had about a 1/3 instant equity position, which is very significant. And it probably made the difference for people who felt able to build a kit home of their own. So I really cannot imagine what Sears did to improve the housing stock of these communities that have so many Sears homes.
Well, if your roof leaks, you could damage everything in your home. I mean, it could lead to mildew and rot, and once you get mildew, it can be a very severe problem. The most common thing wrong with an old roof is there's usually too many layers on it, and that's why we're removing the old layers on this house here. We take everything off, we inspect for rotten wood. After we install the ice and water shield and the vapor barrier, we install the shingles. If there's any valleys, we install the ice and water into the valleys also. And we also install a ridge vent, which is on the very top of the roof. It's very important to have ventilation so the roof can breathe. If it's not properly vented, it can sweat. And what will happen is if you get the inside temperature, especially in the wintertime, connected with the outside temperature with a hot and cold meet at your roof area, it will sweat. Sweating can cause the mildew in the roof, which will cause health concerns. Years ago, they used to use a lot of wood shakes, and the wood shakes actually had holes right through the shingles. And you could actually, if you were in the attic, you could actually look out and see the stars. But as soon as it started to rain, the wood shakes would just tighten up, and they actually vented themselves. Well, as time went on, they went to asphalt shingles, and the roofs became tighter and tighter and tighter, to a point where it's a very tight seal, and when it can't breathe, it will sweat, and that's why they got to start venting. And your roof is the most valuable thing that you have in your home, and a lot of people don't think at it that way, but the roof over your head protects your entire house.
Another fascinating part of the Sears home history that I think is a topic unto itself is how many immigrants, men and women of color, and single women were able to buy a Sears home that had been denied home ownership because redlining was the rule of the day back in the 10s and the 20s and even into the early 30s. And Sears offered mortgages on these houses, very generous terms, 75% mortgages. If you owned your own lot, that counted as a down payment. So in other words, full financing on these kit homes. To qualify for a Sears mortgage, there was only one question you had to answer. What is your vocation? If you had a job, you got a mortgage. And I love that. As you read the testimonials from these people who bought these houses, many of them are very difficult to pronounce names, and you wonder how many immigrants fresh to this country who would have been redlined by the traditional lenders of the day were able to not only get a home, but to secure financing. And one of the sad things, a competing kit home company of that era also offered easy financing on their kit homes, but they had an extra line on their mortgage application that said, "What is your race?" Well, for what possible good reason could that be asked? So I think Sears was incredibly progressive and did an incredible, unspeakable amount of good in offering the great brass ring of home ownership to people who were new to this country. One of my favorite stories came from a man who read my book, and he wrote me a letter and told me that he had built his own Sears kit home in 1940. So he had gone to this store in Chicago and he talked with one of the salesmen at the Sears Modern Home Sales Center. And he said, well, I really like the Hammond, which was one of their smaller homes. But he said, the kitchen's 8 by 10 and I'd really like a bigger kitchen. He asked if he could get the kitchen enlarged to 8 by 12, and the salesman said, well, why don't we add 2 feet to the whole back of the house? And the house was about 35 feet wide. So imagine, this was going to add about 70 square feet to the house. It would change the pitch of the back roof, a lot of extra building materials. They'd have to redraw the blueprints, completely change the quantity of building materials, made a lot of changes for these extra 2 feet across the back 35 feet of the house. And the man said, well, that sounds pretty interesting, but how much is that going to cost me? And the salesman went into a back room and said, well, let me do the math. And he came back after a bit, and this man who shared the story said he was so nervous, wondering how much all this extra was going to cost him, and thought about the work involved in altering a blueprint like this. Finally, the salesman returned. He said, okay, I've done all the math. 2 feet extra across the back of your 35-foot wide house is going to cost you an extra 67 bucks. So he went with the extra 2 feet. And you could get your Sears house customized. Probably about 1 out of 3 Sears homes were customized when built. Another great story came from a man I met in Wood River, Illinois. His mother had found a Sears home that she just loved, but she found a second Sears home she loved also. In fact, she liked the bottom half of one house and the top half, or the roof lines, of another house. She literally cut up a Sears Modern Homes catalog, pasted this creation together, sent this cut-up, pasted version of a catalog page into Sears Roebuck and said, can you ship me this house? And they wrote back and said, sure. So there's a Sears house out there somewhere in southwestern Illinois that is 2 houses put together.
It's an old world technique that was honed down to a craft by the original owners of the company. Brick face and stucco and stone face. The type of stone we do is very specialized, detailed work that's done by our craftsmen who are trained in our university. So it is a very detailed work that takes a lot to learn and takes someone who really knows what they're doing to do.
What I really wanted to do was update the house, but still try and maintain some character. Just looking at the style of the house and kind of looking what everyone else had made me decide, let's do a little random cut stone here, because I don't see a lot of that. It's a little showy, and it's going to definitely give her some curb appeal again. You can find a place for a little bit of stone or a little bit of brick anywhere if you just look hard enough.
Now, a customer today wants that special touch. They want their house to stand out from every other house in the neighborhood. You originally had on the house a 7-inch clapboard, which was a large all the way around. It kind of made the house look a little bit smaller than it is. What we chose for you in the structure was a 5-inch panel, which makes the house appear bigger.
Taking into consideration the style of the home, the color of the roof, as well as the surroundings, we wanted to do something neutral and somewhat safe, but a little different, and that's what made us choose this color. If you're doing shingles or you're doing half rounds, they're really not made to go everywhere on a home. They're more of an accent piece. So you want to pick certain places on the home to accent and kind of make stand out. If you ever want to dress up a house just a little bit and you're not quite sure what to do, Do a window header, you know, put a mantle somewhere, and what a difference it makes. So you can actually get crown molding, and it looks just like the wood, but it's actually vinyl, because it's 100% virgin vinyl. And anytime you do vinyl on your home, you want to make sure you do something like that, because that'll last you a good 30 years versus doing, you know, maybe a contractor grade or recycled vinyl. If you outline everything in white, it gives it a much larger appearance. So it's just to give it some pop. Wow, you know, when we're done with this, it's going to be magnificent.
So Lorain was a fairly popular house for Sears. It was only offered in the 30s, and typically the houses that Sears offered in the 30s you don't see very many of, because the housing sales had gone down so much in that decade. Some of them have the rounded dormer, such as is in this house, and some have a gabled dormer, but the round dormer is certainly very distinctive. It had lots of windows, had a very cute little covered entry. In fact, in the 1908 General Merchandise Catalog, there was an ad that said, "Let us be your architect without cost to you." And interested customers were invited to write in and request a specialty catalog, and it was a book of modern homes and building plans. And it was a complete kit. It came with 30,000 pieces of house, together with a 75-page instruction book. And Sears promised that a man of average abilities could build one of these homes in about 90 days. Very ambitious. In meeting some of these people who actually built these Sears kit homes themselves, I learned that often it took many months to build these kit homes because people had bought a kit home to save some money, and they would build the houses on nights and weekends. So in building the houses on nights and weekends, it extended the time out a bit. I met one person who took them about 10 years to build their Sears kit house. I met somebody else who did it in 6 months of nights and weekends. So the time varied quite a bit.
The landscaping was up to each homeowner. However, the Sears and Roebuck catalog drew in landscaping suggestions for each home. The original owners who built the Lorain here in New Jersey followed that layout, and after 70 years, the retaining wall was ready to go. The concrete in the driveway was also needing replacement. The ideal was to find one company to do the retaining wall, the driveway, the walkway, and the landscaping, and to have the new design stay close to the original design to keep the historical value. It was a challenge that Darren Davis of Celtic Concepts had no trouble meeting.
I've always had a good sense of feel for a property.
Darren presented a solid plan we could see first.
And we want the pavers and all that to neutralize against the house, which is a neutral colour in itself with the beige siding. And then our flat material then will bring out the character and the cornering of the front of the house and the porch. And we put in the hydrangeas and the crepe myrtles to give it the colour for the summertime. So in most cases, walls only fail because they have no drainage system to pull the water out from behind it. So what we do is we put in a 4-inch perforated pipe behind the wall. We install 3/4-inch clean stone around the pipe, and then we backfill it. So what happens is the water in the higher elevation hits the wall, drains down through the stone into the pipe, and drains out through a hole at the side of the wall. And that stops any hydraulic action from pushing the wall out.
A Country Manor retaining wall is a very good choice for older homes. It has that old antique look to it.
The retaining wall materials were selected also for the antique finish, as our expert on anchor products from Belgard explains.
Any product that's antiqued and processed is a product that's made and it's new and it's fresh, We let it cure for about 14 days, and then we run it through an antiquing machine, which then takes off some of the sharp edges, gives it more of a rustic, old world, used look as opposed to so fresh and new, which can sometimes be a little sharp on the eyes and the edges.
I like Country Manor wallstone because it's very simple, it's very elegant. When you put a limestone cap on it, it gives it a nice appeal. It doesn't take away from the house. It obviously blends with the color of the house so that it doesn't stand out on its own.
Limestone is the material used to cap the retaining walls.
But I find that using the limestone, it gives a far more elegant look, nice finish, and it blends in very nicely with the stairs.
Instead of replacing the concrete on the walkway, pavers were chosen for a few reasons.
We have a lot of issues here with freezing and thawing. With very hot summers and very cold winters, you'll find that concrete has a tendency of cracking. The beautiful thing about pavers is it's very elegant when installed correctly. It gives you a nice clean flat surface. It brings up the property value considerably, and it can be reinstalled.
This particular product that you've chosen for the sidewalk and the patio is called our London Cobble series. If you look at it, it has a very distinct finish to the edge of the paver, and this particular product has our anchor guard finish on it, which removes any of the coarse aggregate from the surface of the paving stone and gives you a better and longer lasting wearing surface on the paver. Looks very nice in historic type applications, sort of an old world, more natural, not as sharp edged paving stone.
One of the best things about Anchor products is their surface on their pavers doesn't deteriorate, or you get value for money.
Usually with clay brick you're stuck with the reds and orange colors. With concrete paving stones you can get into browns and grays, you can do the reds, different sizes. We have different finishes. This happens to be part of our Anchor Guard series. Maintenance for this product is pretty simple. After the job is done and it's swept with sand, you basically just have to keep it clean from debris. You don't want to let leaves collect and clutter on there, because eventually they'll break down and you'll get organic matter that will collect in any of the nooks or crannies.
You just simply power wash out the joints every 2 to 3 years, keeps the pavers clean, and then you just fill it with a polymetric sand, which is a concrete-based sand. Fill all the gaps up. As soon as the rain hits it, it hardens up in the joints, and you don't have to worry about it for anywhere up to 2 to 3 years.
We constantly are working hard to make sure that we're providing one of the best products in the industry. Invite the unexpected and be prepared for company, because once they see our products at your home, they're going to want to come and visit you.
The concrete in the driveway was also needing replacement.
Well, I prefer asphalt to concrete anyway. Asphalt is far more resilient to salt erosion. Asphalt is a lot less expensive. It usually holds up for anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 years, and sometimes even longer if seal coated properly. It's also very neutral. It doesn't take away, again, from the appearance of the house. Whereas if you were to take this house, put pavers in front of it, which is natural, put the retaining walls and the limestone caps that we've used, which is natural, and then put a white concrete going all the way up, again, it would just look like it's a landing pad, which is not what we want to create. We want it to blend in, we want the blacktop to blend in, and we want the pavers and all that to neutralize against the house, which is a neutral color in itself.
We grade the driveway so water would have proper flow, and it drains right out to the street. Asphalt is actually oil. That's what makes it black. A good driveway should last anywhere today from 15 to 20 years before you should do it over again. It all depends on the condition of it. Some can be overlaid and some have to be torn out and done over. You seal coat it next spring, you seal coat the following, and then you don't have to touch it again for 5 years and repeat the same process. That's the proper way to do it. You would want the sealer to wear off, okay? So that, because so many applications, a lot of people do it every year, and then what happens, it gets so many layers of sealer on it, okay? It starts cracking and chipping, just like when you paint so many times over and over and over. Okay, it starts flaking. What happens is you think the driveway's bad, but it's not. It's the sealer. I don't think, the younger generation knows much about that. That years ago, you could buy a home through Sears and Roebuck catalog.
You like try to use more simpler paver, simpler colors, more natural colors. Like even with the retaining walls that we've put in here, we've used flash brown, which is a very natural color. It's a gray and brown mixed together that we blend. We've put nice, small, elegant landscaping in front of it. Smaller bushes, incorporate that into the landscape, and then we put a simple bushes like Ilex compacta, hydrangea, daylilies. Well, obviously sod is like carpet. When the farm cuts it, they cut it about 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. So we prep the ground, we lay starter fertilizer on the top of it because it doesn't burn the root system, and then we lay the sod on top, and then you keep it watered for twice a day for about 2 weeks. It has to keep constant water for the first to second season in order for it to reseed itself and send new taproots down, so it becomes its own entity in a sense. You want to get a crabgrass control down and grub control and insect control. What we done was we modernized the old landscape by introducing new retaining walls, new stepping system. We regraded, re-topsoiled, ripped out the old landscaping and put in brand new landscaping. Add a little bit of flower, maybe a snow fountain cherry like we have in the center of the yard over there, gives some nice blossom in the springtime, and basically then it gives you all your coverage, so when everything dies off you still have nice green backdrop against your house. We have one plant material that we put in that is not indigenous, which is the Crepe Myrtle from North Carolina. It gives you a nice bloom of flowers right through the whole summer season, July and August and into September, which will really give a nice appearance for the house and keep it very simple, not taking away from the character. When we do landscaping, we want to enhance your house, not hide your house.
Using a professional landscape contractor and quality materials gave results that exceeded expectations.
I mean, everybody wants to be happy when they come home, and what's the first thing you see is what's going to make you happy.
The charm and elegance was carried right through to the backyard as well, with the addition of the patio furniture. The furniture style chosen looks lovely with or without cushions. It has a beautiful finish that blends with all the other colors. The table has a barbecue pit that doubles as an ice bucket, all keeping the simple and elegant theme.
And then I also met a woman in Greenville, Illinois, also actually in her mid-90s, who was still living in the Sears home she and her husband had built in 1936. And while her children would chastise her as the decades passed for not moving into a more modern home or not upgrading the fixtures, she told me how much she loved the home. And incredibly, that house looks like a house out of the Sears catalog. It has been untouched by time. Original switch plates, light fixtures, plumbing fixtures with a Sears stamp still in the corner. It's one of my favorite homes. Part of the reason Sears stopped selling houses was the Great Depression. Housing starts went way down around 1933. In fact, I think the Wall Street Journal reported housing starts were down 40% for 1932. So housing sales went way, way down.
In 1934, 11 million in mortgages were liquidated. Sears had a reputation to protect. They ate that debt because Sears didn't want to be known to the public as the company who took people's houses away.
The other thing was that housing was becoming increasingly complicated with plumbing, electrical systems, and fancier heating systems. And it was becoming a little more difficult for the average do-it-yourselfer to just get a house and build it himself. It required specialties of contractors and subcontractors.
Before 1940, the Sears catalog offered a few different oil heating systems for the homeowners to choose from. It was part of the kit house they were ordering. Today, oil heating systems still keep houses the warmest for the same amount of energy used as other methods. Having automatic deliveries and 24/7 service is a great way to keep your mind at ease. Sears catalog homes are being torn down at an alarming rate. Many people just don't even know they have one. They have great historical value. Here are a few ways to tell if you have a kit home. First, your house must be built between 1908 and 1940. Second, most likely the house is within a few miles of a train station or a train station that used to be there. Third, look for marked lumber in the basement around 6 or so inches from the end. Sears kit homes have a letter and 3 numbers like C377. Next, look for blocks of wood where usually difficult woodcuts would have been needed. And most often, the second floor won't have flat ceilings. These are a few ways to tell if you have a kit home. Knowing you have a historical home from such a proud time in American housing history is a game changer.
I think my favorite part about Sears homes is it's just such an amalgamation of American history intertwined with the history of immigrants coming to the country with fresh hopes, intertwined with the history of architecture, with merchandising history. It's just really the convergence of so many fascinating, uniquely American elements of our history. And it's a wonderful time in our history. I mean, the Little House on the Prairie books, Laura Ingalls Wilder talks about life on the prairie in the 1870s and 1880s. She talks about living in a soddy, which was a house made of dirt bricks. She talks about grass growing on the roof. When it rained, mud would leak into her house. She talks about life in a very primitive cabin where it was so cold she'd wake up and find frost on her comforter. To go from that in the 1870s and 1880s to a home with a central heating system, indoor plumbing, electricity in 1908. That's a fantastically fast evolution of housing in the span of 3 decades, less than a lifetime. So I find that fascinating. In fact, as late as 1917, American carpenter and builder was suggesting that a house with weather-tight walls was a plus. That was 1917. So American housing went through this fascinating and very rapid evolution at that time. And that's another favorite element, is just watching the growth of how, we all expect to have primitive housing or basic housing. And what we consider primitive basic housing today would have been a luxury mansion in the early 1900s. So I guess my favorite elements are just all the uniquely American aspects of somebody picking up 30,000 pieces of house at the depot and turning it into a home of their own. And then it was a home, so many of these elderly people have come to my lectures, and they still get a tear in their eye as they talk about building the house or watching Dad build the house, or how Dad made a game of reading off a part number on the blueprint and said the kids scampering to find the piece of lumber that was marked A117. People put their hearts and souls into these houses, and they still love them, and yet so few people have even heard of Sears kit homes today. And they're at imminent risk of destruction. As I mentioned, in some of the higher priced communities, these houses are being torn down at an alarming rate. So So, and also I guess it's the preservationist in me. They are simple houses. They're the working man's houses, the middle class houses, the immigrants' houses. They need to be preserved and protected. So it's, I guess, a part of the underdog in me loves it's hidden treasure. That's another element. Finding these houses and knocking on the door and talking to the homeowner and saying, did you know this house came out of a kit? It came out of the Sears Roebuck catalog. It came in all these pieces and somebody put it together with a 75-page instruction book. And invariably, these people write me back 2 weeks or 2 months later to say, I can't stop learning about this. This is fascinating. You've opened my eyes. You've changed the way I think about this house. And I've been in communities like East St. Louis, which is considered one of the most depressed communities in this country. And I've talked to homeowners there. And you see these homeowners who've had nothing but bad news for the last 3 or 4 decades get a little glint in their eyes. They hear that their home is special. And they have pride of ownership. And it's amazing how something so seemingly insignificant can be so important.
Current home buyers, architectural historians, and enthusiasts of American culture indicate that thousands of these houses survive in varying degrees of condition and original appearance. Hope you've enjoyed this time, and thanks for joining us. More information can be obtained by visiting www.restoringlorain.com.